How do we get from here to there? If I were to pick a single policy, a single means of getting from here to there, it would be to get the market to tell the environmental truth. And that would translate into, and I describe this in the book, restructuring our tax system, lowering income taxes, and offsetting that with a rise in carbon taxes. No change in the amount of tax we pay, just lowering the tax on income and raising the tax on coal, gasoline. A year and a half ago, Sir Nicholas Stern, formerly chief economist of the World Bank, was asked by the British government to analyze the future costs, of climate change. And in doing that, he said, climate change is the result of a massive market failure. And by that, he meant our failure to incorporate the cost of climate change in the price of coal and the price of gasoline, the price of coal-fired electricity and the price of gasoline. When you explain this, the tax restructuring, to people, almost everyone says, why not? It's a great idea. We don't change how much tax we pay, only what we tax. Some of you may remember a US company called Enron. In the late 1990s, Enron was probably on the cover of more business magazines than any other corporation in the country. It was a darling of Wall Street. Couldn't wait for its quarterly reports with their increased earnings and so forth. At one point, it was the 7th most valuable corporation in the United States. And then in late 2001, some outside accountants began looking more carefully at Enron's books. And when they finished their audit, they discovered that Enron was essentially worthless. Its stock, which had been trading at $96 a share, was trading for pennies per share. Enron had devised some rather clever techniques for leaving costs off the books. We are doing exactly what Enron did, except on a far larger scale. We've been pretending that climate change, global warming, doesn't exist, so we don't have to worry about the cost. We're now at a point where we realize we can't do that. The risk with leaving costs off the books is that it can lead to bankruptcy. That's why I think it's important to restructure taxes. Others favor cap and trade, and we're probably going to end up doing a certain amount of both. Øystein Dahle, D-A-H-L-E, and I quote him in the last chapter of the book, said that socialism collapsed because it did not allow the market to tell the economic truth. Capitalism may collapse because it does not allow the market to tell the environmental truth. And I think in that very short statement, Øystein encapsulated the need to restructure the tax system. In looking at the changes, and I've talked only about a few of them, in the restructuring of the global economy, I think we have to think about moving at wartime speed. What's at stake is the future of civilization itself. And sometimes the amount of change that's required and the speed at which we must undertake it is seen as just not possible. But I go back to World War II. I can see a little bit of white hair in the audience, and some who can remember also remember World War II. December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and sunk a good part of our Pacific fleet in the harbor. January 6th, 1942, a month later, President Roosevelt gave the State of the Union address in which he outlined U.S. arms production goals. He said, we're going to produce 45,000 tanks, 60,000 planes, 20,000 anti-aircraft and artillery guns, 6 million tons of shipping, thousands of ships. I mean, consider the logistics of fighting two massive wars on the far side of two oceans, two major wars on the far side of two oceans. Enormous logistical challenge. People were openly skeptical about these numbers that Roosevelt was laying out. I mean, no one had ever seen numbers like this before, not only in this country, but anywhere in the world. But what Roosevelt and his colleagues realized was that at that time, the largest concentration of industrial power in the world was in the U.S. automobile industry. Because even during the Depression, we were making 2 or 3 million cars a year. So after his State of the Union address, he called in the leaders of the industry. And he said, you know, because you guys represent such a large share of our industrial capacity, we're going to depend heavily on you to help us reach these arms production goals. And they said, well, Mr. President, we're going to do everything we can, but it's going to be a stretch producing cars and all these arms too. He said, we're going to ban the sale of private automobiles in the United States. Ban the sale. He didn't say go shopping. He said we're going to ban the sale of private automobiles. And that's exactly what happened from the beginning of April 1942 until the end of 1944, nearly 3 years. There were essentially no cars produced in the United States, and we exceeded every one of those arms production goals. I mean, we needed enormous numbers of ships and planes. Planes, we needed fighters, bombers, reconnaissance planes, troop transports, cargo transports. But in the end, we produced not 60,000 planes, but 129,000 planes. I mean, even today, it's difficult to imagine producing planes on that scale. But it did not take decades to restructure the U.S. industrial economy. It did not take years. It was done in a matter of months. I mean, it was just a few months. Chrysler went from making cars to making tanks, for example. If we could restructure the U.S. industrial economy that quickly then, think of what we can do now if we get serious about restructuring the world energy economy. It's entirely doable.